For someone whose entire career has been focused on joy, why a podcast on pain? Because these stories need to be told. A good phoenix rising out of the ashes story reminds us all that not only can we survive, we can thrive. And when we emerge, we're different. That's the alchemy of pain. Welcome to another edition of the Alchemy of Pain podcast. I am Brenda Viola, and I was inspired to start this because I went through a really bad period of time, and I wondered if I would make it through. And sometimes hearing the stories of people who did encouraged me to keep going. And so this is a portal for that. I hope that you will find inspiration today. Actually, I know you will, because my guest today is Britt Elam. And just the description on her Instagram page made me want to interview her. She is a holistic coach. She releases internal expectations. Wow, that's a big one, and helps you connect with your internal guidance. We're going to find out how she got to be the person who serves in the world today the way she does. But how would you describe how you serve in the world? And by the way, welcome, Britt.
Thank you, Brenda. It's really great to be with you this morning. How I serve in the world is really kind of the central focus of my life at this point, frankly. I am a holistic coach, which means that I help folks do what you just mentioned, connect with their inner guidance, release external expectations, and live the life that's just right for them, because that's what I would have needed. I read something once that said, once you find out how to heal your pain, teach others. And so that's what I'm doing now.
So let's go there, which is the central focus of this podcast, which is, what was the pain that changed you forever?
So I've had no shortage of life-changing pain, but I think the thing that really set me on the trajectory that I'm on today was the birth of my child. So I had a baby in December of 2019, which, if you'll recall, was immediately prior to a global pandemic. So I became a mom for the first time, and almost immediately we had, these kind of unforeseen circumstances. And so I was in therapy one day, as you are when you're, in these kinds of situations. I was in therapy via telemedicine, of course, because it was COVID and we couldn't leave our homes. And I remember speaking aloud to my therapist words that I had never acknowledged to myself. And they were, my worst fear is that my child would grow up to feel about herself the way that I feel about myself.
When those words came out of your mouth, first of all, I felt it just as you relayed it. But then what do you do with that? I'm so glad that you were with a skilled therapist. How did they guide you to the next step?
So I think the question was, who would I want to be? I was in this very sticky spot that I think a lot of folks of my generation can relate to, which is, we're wanting to parent differently than we were parented, perhaps. And so we're reading the books and listening to the podcasts and have the scripts and all of that. And so I felt really confident in my ability. Obviously, parenting is difficult, but I felt like I was doing the work I needed to do to know how to tell her that she could be anyone she wanted to be and embrace her voice. I had all the right words to say. And at the same time, I knew that she would look to me as a model of what it means to be a woman and a mother. And I would not want for my child to have the life that I at that time had. And I knew that I would model for her things that I would not wish for her.
It takes such honesty to get to that point. And yet, so many times people look at an exterior life and say, what's the problem? I mean, it looks pretty good to me. So what were the signals that you weren't living your authentic life?
I love that question. I think the biggest one for me, honestly, was my internal world. So what you're saying really resonates. Someone, a fly on the wall, would have said, what's the problem? You've got this beautiful baby, you've got a job that you quite like, you have a partner that you adore. What's the problem? The problem was I was so hateful to myself, so judgmental and perfectionistic, and nothing I ever did was good enough. And I made sure to tell myself often. And I learned those behaviors because they were modeled for me. And so I really had to decide for myself that I would not pass that forward.
One of my favorite books is You Can Heal Your Life by Louise Hay. And she said, you've been criticizing yourself for years. Why don't you try approving of yourself and see what happens? And I always use that when I hear my internal critic just raking me over the coals for the smallest infraction. So I love that you tuned into this internal voice that was hateful to yourself. How did you break free from those grooves in your soul that made those patterns comfortable for you?
For me, it really started with curiosity, with understanding where that voice came from and why it was so loud. And frankly, a really hard part of this is what I was getting out of it, which forced me to kind of look at my own role in maybe perpetuating some of this because it was comfortable. Even though the voice was hateful, it was one that I knew well and it didn't push me outside of my comfort zone. My comfort zone wasn't actually very comfortable. It didn't feel good, but it was what I knew. It was the devil I knew. And so I had to get really curious around where is this voice coming from and why have I kind of allowed it? Why have I fed into it? Why have I not asked myself these questions before? And it was comfort. It was a fear that if I let myself be kind to myself, if I let myself feel hopeful, I might be let down.
Familiar is comfortable, even if it's painful. What you've said is really profound there. And I find myself reflecting, and I think our audience the same way, is thinking too about the harsh voice on the inside and this importance of modeling for your daughter. Because as I sit here, a 60-year-old woman, I realize that I spent much of my life trying to please my mother and trying to make her happy, realizing too late, you can't make anyone else happy, and contorting myself to try and be a version of Brenda that would be acceptable to my mother. Now, I'm not criticizing her because she had her own journey, but it's for me to work out mine. And I honor you for working out yours and seeing the importance of what you model to your daughter. Do you find in your practice that many of us women are striving to be the good daughter, the acceptable daughter, the one who finally gets the stamp of approval?
Oh, absolutely, yes. Perhaps I'm a little bit biased because given that this is sort of my area of expertise, I do tend to draw in clients with a journey of this kind. And I will say that regardless of what someone comes to me for, whether it's I'm starting a business, great, let's coach on that. Or I am looking to make a life transition, we can coach on that. We always come back to this question of when did you first learn that you were not enough and that being as you are and wanting the things that you want authentically was not good enough and that you needed to strive to be something else, something different, something better.
Sometimes when we are faced with this opportunity to break away from what's familiar, we choose not to because we know it's going to crack open the rest of our life. I knew when I got really honest with Brenda that my marriage was going to be in trouble. And I cared more about preserving the image of the marriage than I did about my own happiness. It wasn't until I finally realized I was sacrificing my entire life for someone else that didn't appreciate it. And I know this is not about me, but I'm painting a picture for our audience. So there's this familiar thing, even though it's painful. And then there's the opportunity to change. But if you go there, this could explode. Did that happen in your own life?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, very much so. I like to say you can't unring the bell. And once I knew this, once I had named it for myself, I couldn't unknow it. Even though at times I think I wish that I could. I wished I could just put it down because the healing journey that it kind of forced me on was a lot and at times got heavy and tiresome. And so there were times that I thought, man, I just wish I could, not know this about myself, not know that I have all of this healing to do. But you can't unring the bell. And once I knew, I had to think about who I wanted to be and what in my life was supporting that version of me and what wasn't. And the things that weren't, I sort of had to prune out. And they all kind of started to fall away on their own anyway, because I was committed to being this more authentic version of myself.
So, were there times in this process, and I love your candor saying, I wish I could put the genie back in the bottle, but you can't do that. You can't unring the bell. Part of the goal of this podcast is to identify the pain, but the tools you use to make it through that valley, your curiosity, absolutely, your commitment to healing. Were there other tools that you use to help you get from the realization that I need to break out of this old negative pattern and begin a healing journey? What kept you going?
I honestly, I'll be really candid with you. I think I stalled for a long time because I focused on what I didn't want to be, what I knew I needed to heal from. I got very clear with the not this. That's kind of a moment that I named for myself and that I named for clients as well, as that moment of I don't know exactly what I want, but I know it's not this. And I was very familiar at that point with what I didn't want, with what I thought was wrong with me, what needed healing, all of that. But I still hadn't really allowed myself to look forward to what would I want instead? What do I dream of? What do I hope for? What does my soul long for? And I think I was too afraid to do that for a long time because, again, that familiarity and hope was not a familiar place for me. So I stalled out a little bit because I focused on what needed fixing and lost sight of where I was going and the version of myself that I knew was in
So important to fall in love with your future. But for many of us who have hearts to serve and give, we give and give and give and give and never even stop to think about what we want. So,
there.
giving yourself permission to dream. Oh, if that is the takeaway, even just the one nugget from this interview, I think it's such an important thing. And why don't we? Because we don't know we're worth having a dream.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know our own worth. Let's talk about this self-worth thing because it's intermingled with our internal critic and our self-talk. I find that it is the seminal issue for most of the women I meet, whether it's at the gym or at the bar stool next to me. Even though I don't drink, I sit on bar stools and I talk to women in airports, and they're settling for less in work, in life, in relationships because they don't know how good they are. It gets me fired up.
Oh, me too, Brenda. I could talk about this all day.
So, settling your self worth
Mm.
is linked to being able to dream of your future. Did you find that in your journey as well?
Yes, absolutely. I think that's frankly a piece that I still grapple with is, being in my worth and naming that and claiming it for myself. There is a quote that for me, I love language. Words are so powerful for me. And there's a quote by Buchner: "The place God calls you to is where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet."
Can you please repeat that?
Yes, the place God calls you to is where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet.
Pain leading to purpose. That's the theme of every person I interview here, the resilient ones. And I find that hope is so linked to resilience.
Mm-hmm.
They find something in it that makes them want to help someone else never have to go through what they did.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about releasing internal expectations first, and then I want to get into connecting with your inner guidance. But releasing internal expectations, do you think some of us don't even realize that we have them? How do we identify our internal expectations?
So I like to help folks actually release their external expectations, and that comes from, but we do internalize those things, of course, and they become the things that we hold ourselves to, not realizing that that didn't actually come from within. That came from someplace else. This thing that you're pushing yourself to do that doesn't actually feel good to you, there's a reason it doesn't feel good to you, because it's not from you or of you or for you.
So, finally giving yourself permission to say, yes, just because the cultural expectation created this sense of I should do this,
Mm-hmm.
saying no, learning to say no
Mm-hmm.
to the drumbeat. That's important. So then this inner guidance thing. So you're talking my language because I feel that hope and resilience are linked. But then this other thing I've discovered is that people who listen to their inner guidance find their resilience. So
Mm-hmm.
how do we strip away all the other chatter and connect with that inner guidance?
I think that's something that has to look different for each of us just because of the nature of the task. You're connecting with your deepest self, your highest self, source, God, whatever it is you want to call it, this thing, this kernel that I believe resides within all of us. And so for me, that can look like a yoga practice. For someone else, that could look like being on a basketball court and they find a flow there that allows them to drop into a space. For someone else, that looks like being in nature. It could be any number of things, but find your place where you drop in.
So helpful because I have had wonderful friends who really get into meditation, and I tried, and it was like going to the dentist's office without Novocaine. And, and while I do believe in quieting my mind and all that, and I found my flow in Zumba class. And it's, not quote unquote a spiritual practice, but let me tell you, when I am in the music and my body is moving and I'm not thinking about a thing, I find joy. So, what is the connection between the flow and joy, or your inner guidance and joy? Because that seems linked too.
Absolutely. I think when you find those moments of flow, and what you're saying resonates completely, Brenda. I dance, I'm a dancer, and I can't tell you how many times when I thought I was in one space and I got on the floor and I left the floor in tears because, through the movement, I connected with something that needed releasing. So definitely the idea of Zumba and kind of moving, even that somatic practice of moving energy, moving emotion through your body. So I think for me, flow is when you find those moments when everything else has fallen away. You're in Zumba class and you're so in it, you couldn't help but be in it. There's no space for anyone else's voice because it is all Brenda. You are so in your body that there is nothing else. You have crowded out everything else because you are so full of yourself.
And the good news is it's never too late. I mean,
No.
it took 60 years for me to figure out that this is what did it for me.
Mhm.
And it's thrilling, actually. It makes me feel newborn. And so I encourage the audience listening, don't try to be and do what everybody else is doing to get there. You can get there. You just need to experiment a little. Give yourself permission to try something new and to like it. And you might even be surprised. You might be shocked. If when I was talking to my sister yesterday, Britt, I'm like, yeah, I did 20,000 steps yesterday because I did a Zumba masterclass. And she's like, who are you? Who are you? I never was that person, but you don't have to be. It is never too late to be who you always wanted to be. I love that line, and I wear it like a badge of honor, and I encourage my audience to do the same. So, Britt, are you today the woman that you had hoped to be? I mean, I know we're all on a journey. We're never all going to get there completely, but who are you today that you weren't in 2019?
Oh, I love that question. I think, yeah, we're all on a journey. And so I have my better days and I have my harder days. And I think what has fundamentally changed for me is what I am going after. For so long, it was perfection. That was the thing that I was striving for. And that was what I measured every experience against. Did I look perfect enough? Did I act perfect enough? How perfect was it? Did I make the thing go off perfectly at work? What have you? I'm no longer interested in being perfect at all. I'm interested in being present and authentic. And I can honestly say that I am more those things now than I have ever been.
Presence over perfection. And what an impossible standard to try to live by, to be perfect. None of us are. And I always say it's not perfection that creates connection.
Mm.
I sense a wonderful connection today with you. I'm so honored to our mutual friend, Terry Sidford, who I had interviewed for this podcast, introduced us. And I'm so thrilled that she did because this is such a meaningful conversation. For someone listening and watching right now who is stuck in a groove that they have been in perhaps their whole life, on that hamster wheel of trying to attain an impossible standard and afraid of what they're modeling for their children, or simply thinking, if I live the rest of my life like this, it's going to be a wasted life. What do you say to that person? What's step one?
Step one is it's okay. Step one is telling yourself and really resting in the knowledge that it's okay. It's okay that you are where you are today because shaming yourself over it, raking yourself over the coals, doing all of the looking back is going to distract you from the looking forward. So it is okay. And let's look forward. What do you dream of? Once you know that, you can chart a course to get there. But first, you have to let yourself want it.
I hope that everybody listening gives themselves permission to fall in love with their future and to get a vision
Mm-hmm.
for that future. If someone listening or watching wants to get in touch with you and perhaps work with you, how do they do that?
I think probably the easiest way is to find me on Instagram. And I can share that with you, Brenda. I know that you have that information, so make sure that the listeners can get a hold of it. I'm Britt Elam, Holistic Coach on Instagram. And from there, you can find my website and schedule a call to see how we might be able to work together in partnership to get you to be experiencing all of the things that you want in your life.
So, as we close, is there anything left uncovered or unsaid that you wish we had?
I mean, we covered a lot of great ground. we did a lot of good processing here. I think the main thing that I would want people to know is nothing about you is by accident. Nothing that you love or long for is by accident. Everything that your soul wants, those things want you to.
Beautiful way to end. One of my favorite quotes is, "That which you seek is seeking you." What a note of encouragement. And Britt, I want to thank you for your time today. It was a joy and privilege. Let's stay connected. And I want to thank our audience for tuning into this episode of the Alchemy of Pain podcast. Britt talked about hope. She talked about listening to your inner guidance. And I think those are the things that encourage the butterfly when it's a caterpillar to keep pressing in that chrysalis. You are creating strength in your